Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pels.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. So Tom, we are continuing our conversation on AHA Spiritual Formation and really excited about just getting deeper into this space. We've talked about, we've shared a number of people's own experiences with autonomic healing activation, including my own last time around. So hopefully if you listened to that, I hope you enjoyed it. But what we want to do is kind of like, why is it so important that we engage with spiritual formation? Like we've got the body, we always say we're body, mind and spirit, but sometimes it can feel like the spirit's like a tag on, and yet it really isn't.
No, that's the point.
So we wanted to kind of dig into that space a little bit, go a bit deeper in terms of why is it so important for any human being to engage with who we are as spirit, and then allow our spirits to grow and be formed.
Because, and you just said it, we are beings, and beings aren't things. We aren't just a body, and we aren't just a mind. We're a being. A being. If it was just a body, and if it was just a mind, then an android with an artificial intelligence is a being. And that's why it gets so confusing. Because it doesn't mean, theoretically, perhaps some new being can come into existence that is that, and that's getting really weird and a little scary about the possibilities, and very confusing, and sentience. But what we're talking about is more than simply a body and a mind. If that's the case, then my Chromebook, apologies for any copyright things or whatever that is, my computer is a being, but it's not. It's a thing.
Yes.
It processes information. Our minds process information, our brains and our bodies process information. It certainly is a body. It's a thing. My laptop, my body, it is housing that processes information. But we all know instinctively that there's more than that. That we are a being.
Yeah.
And that being is what spirit is. So when I first figured out how to activate somatic homeostasis, that was normalizing the stress and trauma reaction and reactivity to optimize, which is homeostasis, to bring that into normal, optimal functioning in the body. And then a couple of years later, as I talked about in the AHA-PS, I wondered if it was possible to activate the problem-solving function in the prefrontal cortex interacting with the limbic system. And the prefrontal cortex is that part that's the brain behind your forehead that is engaged in executive function. In other words, anything that you do with your body and get your body to do, that's executive function. That's you in charge of you. And then there is the not just the executive function, but the sense of being able to anticipate something and anticipating possibilities, which because of these seemingly rational perceptions is a negative anticipation, and it's often and the majority of times inaccurate. This disaster that we think is going to happen, this person who is surely rejecting us. No, they love us. It's like, what were you thinking? Why was I thinking that this was going to be a disaster when it's just turned out wonderfully? But we often do that. That's the prefrontal cortex, that anticipation, but turned into a negative because of the seemingly rational perceptions. There is also personality expression, and a function of the prefrontal cortex is the expression of our personalities and its function of problem solving and figuring things out. What's the solution? What is What am I trying to remember? And that's the part of the brain that connects with the limbic system, which is memory and learning and emotion, and that interplay between them. But with the mind, we're using the prefrontal cortex to do those things, and then the decisions that we make based on that. But because of the seemingly rational perceptions, these ways that we think about ourselves, others, and situations that make sense to us and seem rational, but actually aren't, and then the solutions we come up with our minds are just more problems.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wondered, is it possible to connect the somatic homeostasis, the body in that optimum neurobiological space that is normal, is processing, is in homeostasis, and connect that with an activation of the prefrontal cortex to let the brain itself do the problem solving. It does the thinking in what is classically thought of as an aha moment.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure something out, you can't. Or you're trying to remember something and are unable to. You stop using the prefrontal cortex with the limbic system, and the brain keeps thinking. Because the brain, which is you, but it's also not you in your perceptions, which is the mind and consciousness, and that's a whole other conversation. But it keeps going. And then it says, here's the solution. Yeah. Oh, I know what I could do. And it brings it into conscious awareness. Or, oh, I remember now. And the brain is thinking. But because it's your brain, you are thinking. You're just not the one in charge of the thinking. And those are called involuntary autobiographical cognitions. And in AHAPS, that's what we're letting the brain do. The brain is informing the mind consciously of what is an actually rational solution, which is actually a rational decision to make. And the brain does that. And then a few years later after that, I wondered, is it possible that there could be such a thing as a spiritual homeostasis, where as a being, and it's not just me as a being individually, but we know inherently, instinctually, that there is a being that I am a part of that is more than just me. We have words for that. Love, family, community, a village, a people. All these words are trying to describe us collectively as a being that is transcendent, that is more than just my individual me. Yeah. That is a we and an us.
It's lovely to hear, how this took time for you to develop, years and years. And finally we end up in this spiritual space, which makes sense because we are body, mind, spirit. I mean, I think it's like body is like the emergency.
I'm very aware
SOS. Like, we need to fix this right now. And then the mind is problem solving.
Figure this out.
Yeah.
And I can't.
But at the end of the day, we all know, like you just mentioned, we are spirit. If we neglect our spiritual being, then we're not going to grow. We're not going to thrive. We're not having homeostasis, like you say, is life. And to really live is to understand, enter in to our spiritual being with ourselves, others, and the transcendent.
Yes, because we aren't just a body. We don't just have a mind, which we frequently can lose. We are a being. And we can experience that, and not just individually, but collectively. And there can be a homeostasis in that. And that just opens the doors and windows to all sorts of possibilities. Because then it's more than just me. It is we, and it is us. And that can even be, dare I say, in homeostasis. And there is a synergy that occurs, that the sum is greater, the end is greater than the sum of its parts, and the parts are all these beings, and it's transcendent and beyond that. And then all sorts of things can happen that we couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
But they just happen. And we can connect with that, we can facilitate that, we can activate that, we can initiate it, we can invite it. And that's what spiritual formation is.
Can we just talk about, we talked about this a little bit before we even started this episode, but can we talk about faith? Because I think it's a funny word, isn't it? When I think about faith, I think, just without the religion attached to it, I think, you need faith for all sorts of things in life. You need faith to relate with people. You need faith to trust a relationship. You need faith to go for a job interview. Often people say you need to take a step of faith. Mm-hmm. I think that's helpful to see.
We all know that.
Yeah, and I bring it up because I think when I think about AHA, somatic, cognitive and spiritual, I think you need, often you'll find people coming to you and they'll come to you, but they're taking a step of faith because they don't know, a leap of faith. But, we don't know, they don't know all the neuroscience behind it. So when I think about the whole thing, I think you need faith to enter into autonomic healing, but particularly the spiritual formation, because people have so many connotations. And ironically, the word faith, like you said, is loaded. I think it's a word that potentially can count people out of,
and often is used that way.
Yeah. So I would just love you to unpack that a little bit in terms of what is, let's get underneath that word.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this isn't simply, the word faith is transcendently human and far beyond simply any one culture or religion. Faith, for those in Western society with its Judeo-Christian background, will think of the word faith in the Bible, and that's a Greek word, pistis. But that goes back far beyond Christian faith. That goes into Greek mythology, and there was the personification of Pistis in Greek mythology. And Pistis was the personification of trust and reliability and honesty and operating in good faith. Because what faith has to do with is risk. If you think about it.
Yeah.
It's inherently about risk. The interaction between two beings is fraught with risk. Is this person reliable? Is this person trustworthy? Are we reliable and trustworthy? Because it's all about risk. And remember about flight or fight.
Yeah.
It encounters a sense of threat, sensed or perceived threat to well-being. And what can I do with that? Can I maintain a sense of contentment, homeostasis, or succumb to that threat, real or imagined, and that escalating tsunami of stress takes off, and we feel a sense of stress and need, and we sense distress and discontent then, and it just escalates from the flee the threat, stress and need, fight the threat, distress and discontent, avoid and isolate, flee the threat, resistance, defiance, anger, and not being assertive, fight the threat, and it just escalates because the root issue is, what do I do with this threat and the risk it poses? And what do I do with that? What can I do with that? It was you climbing the 14er with me and sensing just the height and the space and all of that as threat until it turned into joy and amazing awe. It's the splendor of it. It was the same thing. It was you on a mountain in Colorado looking out into the space of that, and what that had been was threat, but it turned into awe and beauty and enjoyment. But it was the same thing, but the perception and the sense of that
Mm-hmm.
had been transformed by homeostasis.
I love that picture and just that memory of just thinking, wow, that did actually happen. I did climb a 14er. But more than that, what happened in that space for me was what you just described. And when I think it's a really strong picture, Tom, of what people encounter as they go into AHA spiritual formation.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, it is a mountain, it's
risk.
climbing a mountain. It's taking a risk into an unknown space.
A leap of faith.
A leap of faith.
Because it's an encountering of risk, but encountering it in a way that has an element of faith, of trust, of reliability.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when the first time I did any rock climbing, and it was with my son, and I'm standing on Juliet's balcony and overlooking the Potomac River, and my son has me in a harness, and there's all the ropes and everything else, and his friend is there, and he's on belay. He's down at the bottom of Juliet's balcony, and this is a cliff, and I'm hooked into the harness, I'm in the rope, and my son says to me, "I got you, Dad."
Mm-hmm.
And I lean back, I sit into the harness, and I go down. Yes.
Yeah.
Because of pistis. Because of faith, of reliability, and a sense of trust.
And so we need faith, pistis, that sense of trust, to go into an area that we might perceive as threatening, but we know deep down it contains joy.
And if we just take the risk, because there is no life without risk.
Mm.
A life without risk is not a life.
And so there's something about spirit entering into AHA spiritual formation that typifies risk, which I think
inherently about it.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people can stay away for all sorts of reasons, some very, very valid reasons.
Absolutely.
From spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. The words, the connotations, it can mean all sorts of things to people. But if we just kind of go back to the very core of our understanding of spiritual formation, what we're talking about is that we as human beings are body, mind and spirit. And so there's this, it's really an invitation to understand yourself as a spirit being.
Yes.
And take the risk to grow in that space.
Yes, because risk is inherent in life. And there is no life without risk. It's just whether we encounter the risk with faith, with a sense of trust and reliability, not necessarily even in someone other, but in ourselves and in how we exist as a being, and that is capable of encountering the risk in a beneficial way. This is why it's all back to that beneficial and detrimental, and that it isn't necessarily and doesn't have to be detrimental. It can be beneficial, even if it seems detrimental. It can be beneficial. And then it becomes a question of faith and encountering risk. Because no risk isn't a possibility. It's what do I do with risk? And faith allows me to encounter risk beneficially, because since there is no such thing as no risk, I either get to choose healthy risk or unhealthy risk, beneficial risk or detrimental risk, productive risk or unproductive risk. Because risk isn't avoidable, it's gonna be one or the other. I get to choose, and with homeostasis as a normative optimizing function, I can then choose beneficial, productive risk, healthy risk, rather than being risk avoidant. I can be risk assertive.
And if you're risk avoidant, I don't even know
if that concept exists.
Yeah, no,
maybe I just coined it. But risk assertive, rather than risk passive or risk avoidant or risk aggressive.
And risk avoiding really is like you say, I love what you just said. I mean, using the beneficial and detrimental, because risk is happening, whether it's whether it's you're entering in that beneficial space of it happening.
Life is risk.
Or whether it happens to you.
Yes.
Which is the detrimental thing, which are those maladaptive ways of coping. That's risky. My goodness me, it's risky.
Risk health.
Yeah.
Risk finances. Risk freedom. Oh, yeah.
And so there's this invitation. So really, at the core of AHA Spiritual Formation, what we're talking about is an invitation to take a leap of faith in the way we just described.
Yes.
To take risks beneficially.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really, really interesting.
Oh, and so transformative.
It really is.
Because we always are encountering, to one degree or another, risk. And is that risk encounter going to be beneficial and productive in my life? Or is it going to inevitably turn into detrimental and unproductive? One's healthy, the other is unhealthy, but there is no such thing as no risk. When we try to live that way, we are not living at all, because life is risk.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing. And I know that so many people, when they hear life is risk, are going, oh, no. That's life. Mm-hmm. Life is risk.
Yeah. It's interesting, even as parents, I remember just like when my children were born, I was so worried. It was almost like I could anticipate everything going wrong with them. And as time goes on, you realise that to be risk averse in that space is not to parent well. Like like now my kids are 11 and 9, and I'm actually thinking through, how do I help them take healthy risks so that they grow as a human being?
Yes.
And so even as a parent, just that journey has been, interesting in terms of understanding risk, and avoiding risk is not healthy.
No, it's not. It's inherently detrimental.
Anyway, I want us to go back to something you said earlier on. You were talking about your computer, and you were like, if we were just mind and body, like, actually without spirit, who are we? We're no different from a product that can, process. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is really interesting, because I think it helps people understand the importance of AHA Spiritual Formation. And like, what is it then in spiritual formation? And we've talked about it, the spirit being life, being the animation of being, yeah. But one thing that I wanted to bring up was, I think in terms of when I think through my own spiritual formation space with AHA, and just kind of, understanding others in that space too, what tends to come up often is, we pose a question right at the beginning. Yep. What comes
up? An invitation,
yeah.
That's the difference between problem solving and spiritual formation.
Okay.
With problem solving, you're posing a question for the brain to problem solve. With spiritual formation, it's an invitation at a being level to experience what it transcends what I have experienced before. And the fascinating thing is that with everyone that I've done, it's always consistent with that human being.
Yeah, that's amazing. But what I wanted to share was, I think some of the things that mark out our spirit, it are the sense of purpose that we have,
yes,
and the sense of desire. That's what's different from us being a Chromebook, whatever.
Or a PC or an Apple or whatever.
Yeah, because we're not doing any marketing right here.
Absolutely.
But I think that is interesting. And actually those invitations that people give in those spiritual formation sessions are often, if you kind of unpack them all, they're in those categories of purpose and desire.
Absolutely.
And I would just love us just to unpack. And I think when you think through, we are obsessed with our purpose for a reason, because we are spirit and we need to have a sense of purpose, whether that feels, so we don't like it when we haven't figured out what our purpose is. It matters to us.
Purposelessness.
We are thinking constantly about our purpose.
Yes. Why do I matter?
And then desire. We are human beings that have desires. And I think that those two words are really, I'm sure there's more, but I think those two words are words that really help us understand spirit.
Yes. And that's why I mentioned many episodes ago, and I've mentioned it several times since, that work by J. Scott Turner that is on homeostasis, and the book is Purpose and Desire.
Yeah.
What makes something alive, and why modern Darwinism has failed to explain it. Because it became mechanistic. Science became all about things and mechanisms and determinism. And it left out and it lost a sense of spirit, of life itself, ironically. Even as it's studying life and biological organisms and all the physiology of human beings and all the rest of that, it lost the sense of what is the purpose of all this. It's life, it's beings. And it's just, so anyway, J. Scott Turner, a professor, biologist, and physiologist, argues in his book that modern Darwinism's materialist and mechanistic biases have led to a scientific dead end and unable to define what life is. And only an openness to the qualities of purpose and desire will move the field forward. And there is purpose and desire discernible, not just in human beings, but the purpose and desire of a pet. Anybody going to deny that one exists? That's not mechanistic. That's being. The purpose and desire of the bird and its nest. There's purpose. There's desire. There's life. Life in many manifestations, life in many forms, but it's life. And there is purpose and desire. And as Scott Turner contends, to be scientists, we force ourselves into a Hobson's choice on the matter. Accept intentionality and purposefulness as real attributes of life, which disqualifies you as a scientist. Or become a scientist and dismiss life's distinctive quality from your thinking. I've come to believe that this choice actually stands in the way of our having a fully coherent theory of life. And with AHA, it's the scientist part of me, the therapist, the professional, the understanding of the neuroscience of brain activity, of human interaction and psychology, and the faith part of me that was about spirit and being a minister, and that there is something transcendent. And perhaps it's that those two streams allowed me to have a sense of pursuing a way to activate homeostasis.
It's so great. Thank you for reading the part of J. Scott Turner's book there, Purpose and Desire, just a few quotes. And it's interesting that those two words are in the title, Purpose and Desire.
That's why it's in there.
It's,
And if I may share one more.
Yeah, go for it.
Growing research shows that life's most distinctive quality, shared by all living things, is purpose and desire. And that is to maintain homeostasis, is to sustain life. It is to maintain life, which is why AHA is about autonomic healing, or AKA homeostasis activation. It's inviting homeostasis
in those
to
spaces.
be present in those spaces where there has been dysfunction and dysregulation.
And so with
in body, mind, and spirit.
Yeah, in body, mind, and spirit. And so with AHA Spiritual Formation, we're talking about taking a leap of faith, which is risky, taking risks, but to enter into purpose and desire.
Yes, it is a decision to problem solve. How can I experience purpose and desire and significance and I matter so that we can encounter the risks in life at a level of our being? And it's a healthy, beneficial, productive risk taking rather than trying to make no risk even work.
Yeah.
Because there is risk. How do we encounter it? Homeostasis, optimum function, envisioning possibilities, enlarging our worlds, or hiding out. That's not life. That's not living.
So before we wrap up, Tom, I'd love you to share, because you put me on the hot spot last time, so I'm going to throw it back at you. But I'd love you to share just how this, part of AHA, Spiritual Formation, has impacted your life, impacted you over the years, and how significant is it for you to have not just it's not just the body, because it's huge what happens, I think, in AHA somatic. I mean, we see people dramatically heal, but we're not. So it's not just body, mind, but now spirit. So how has the spiritual formation impacted your own? Because your own walk, your own purpose, your own sense of purpose and desire.
Let me just try to approach that question this way. Because, and if you've listened to the earlier episodes, I did share about early experiences of trauma and stress that I experienced. Quite literally, some of them life and death. All of that, even as I was trying to live and wanting to live, was causing me to be risk averse. Go so far, but not farther. And I was willing to go pretty far. And many would say that I took lots of risks. But to me, there was an underlying element of only so far. For me, what AHA has done, what homeostasis in body, mind, and spirit is, it has made me risk assertive. I want to encounter risk, not in a daredevil kind of life risking. That's not rational. And ultimately usually ends very badly. And it's for the stimulation and all that. Now, risk assertive is healthy risk taking. And I'm finally at a place in my life where I am willing to risk, because I know that is living. And that's a beautiful thing. And who knows what may happen?
Yeah.
That's faith.
That is faith. Yeah. Love it.
Who knows what may happen? Extraordinary things that we can't imagine. That's what can happen.
I think if anyone's listening in with AHA Spiritual Formation, that's really the invitation. And we will use Spiritual Formation as something you offer clients after AHA,
Oh,
the main
absolutely.
session,
Yep.
because we need to normalize the body. But it's this beautiful space where we get to discover purpose and desire, where we get to be risk assertive.
Yep.
I love that phraseology. And I think what ends up happening from my point of view is that you almost like entering this huge adventure.
Oh, it is that.
And it can be intimidating at the beginning, especially if you kind of are stuck on some words around religion or
and think
faith.
That spiritual formation is inherently about what some people have made it. But human beings are greater than that. And transcendence, well, that's the point. It is transcendent of our individual experience. And that's amazing space to live in.
It totally is. And so just want to invite our listeners to maybe take a few moments to think about those things, like the understanding of what faith really is, the understanding of beneficial risk-taking, and the understanding of how important it is. We cannot deny purpose and desire. And what my understanding of AHA, spiritual formation, is that it's an invitation into that space of purpose and desire in a healthy way, with rational intimacy, like we talked about all those episodes ago, into a community where we're not swimming in the tsunami of stress, but we are able to, with that healthy paradigm, relate as spiritual beings.
Yes, because homeostasis, that normalization, optimization, neurologically, biologically, spiritually, cognitively, the purpose of that is life, and to restore life, and to maintain life, and the inherent desire for it. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.